Hi everyone. Today we're going to mostly review marking the text, and most of you should be familiar with it, but now we're starting to move to that next level. So it's not going to be just making symbols and stuff like that. So let's dive in. You should have a note sheet. Please make sure that you are filling that out as you go. But also mark down on that sheet if you have questions about something, because eventually down the line you will have a quiz and or a test on this material and the application of the material. So let's do it. Let's launch right into it. So the purpose of marking the text is to highlight and write margins and notes to help you focus and concentrate while reading. When highlighting, you're selecting, organizing, and thinking about the importance of what you are reading. When writing in the margins, so what we call annotating in our case, you are responding, thinking critically, analyzing, and finding evidence for your thoughts. So when you highlight fiction, so remember fiction is stories that are not necessarily true or are told in story format. Look for unfamiliar words. You don't want to gloss over those because eventually those words will catch up with you and you'll find that you're starting to lose the meaning. Look at the conflicts and characterization and look at the literary devices. And even though it's not listed on here, you're also starting to look for themes and evidence of those themes. However, when you're highlighting for nonfiction, some of the same ideas apply. You have to look for unfamiliar words. You have to look for main ideas, key concepts, or key ideas. Again, you want to look for important evidence. If there's a claim, then look for evidence that supports that claim. And then also note any questions you have. So here's an example of the first page of a story by the name of Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. And I want you to notice there is not a ton of highlighting. Very rarely, if at all, did I highlight a whole paragraph. You're never going to need that. Just pick up the key words and phrases that you need. You should never highlight more than 25%. And this is a critical idea to not over highlight, because if you over highlight, you get lost and you can't discern what's important and what's not. So not more than 25% highlighted. However, write this down, what I'm about to say. If you highlight something, you must annotate it. If you highlight, you must annotate it. Make sure you get that written down. So there's two ways of marking a text. And one we'll just call marking the text, and that's the simple way. That's using symbols like a question mark when you don't understand something, or an exclamation mark, or circling the words or underlining. So those usually are symbols. And that's a very basic way of marking the text. And while we still use those ideas because they're important, such as circling the words or boxing a main idea or a key idea, we also need to write in the margins, aka annotation. And this is a little bit more complex, but it allows you to get your thinking done. And think about it this way. When you go on into life or to school next year or to work or whatever, and you have training and you are responsible for that material, you want to be able to look back quickly and not have to reread everything. Let me tell you, if you're going on to school next year, you are not going to have time to reread everything for a test. So what better way than to annotate, where you really should only have to be able to read your annotations to be able to study. And if you're a junior and you're not just going on necessarily next year, but in the future, again, what a great way to be able to study for a final or a test if you only have to read your annotations. So when you annotate, how the heck do you know what to annotate for? And why? And I'm just lost. Well, that's okay. We were kind of work through this together. So you want to do an analysis of literary devices, symbolism, themes, because those are things that, at least in English, you'll get tested on. If it's math, maybe it's an analysis of ideas, or say it's history, American history. You might want to analyze the big concepts. Why, make comments about why something is happening, not necessarily just the facts. Look at the big trends of ideas and make connections. So in this case, you want to make connections between texts and even with ideas within texts. You want to clarify your thinking. You want to visualize. You want to summarize, but use this sparingly. You should only be summarizing small amounts. Very rarely will you summarize. And then you want to respond and comment. So, annotation is a conversation with the text. Since you don't always get to talk to your buddies or your best friend, you need to be able to have this kind of one-on-one conversation with what you're reading. So things to note, especially in fiction, are author's word choice and unique or confusing decisions by the author, or a unique or confusing decision by the author. And the reason why you want to note that is because authors make deliberate choices. And so if they're doing it, it's important for us to note it and to think about why and what does it add to the story. Ask questions. But you don't get to just ask the question and then move on. You actually have to then make sure you go back and answer the question. And maybe the question that you're asking is something that you're going to take to whole class discussion because it's confusing and you didn't understand it and you need clarification. So this is a good time where you might want to also use the symbol so that you note that you have to go back to this and that it's something you want to bring to whole class. Comment on the actions or development of a character. First impressions. Does the character change? How does the character change? Why does the character change? And so on and so on. Why is that character even a character in the story? What's its purpose? Also go ahead and express agreement, disagreement, and why. Why are you agreeing and why are you disagreeing? And there will be times when you're reading and you're like, what? Seriously? That's so frustrating. Make sure you note that. Summarize only key ideas. So that's the only time you want to summarize. You don't want to summarize everything you highlight because not everything you highlight is a key idea. Make predictions. That is one of the best ways to interact with the text because you're predicting what's happening. It means that you're trying to connect what you've read with where you think it's going based off of what you've read. So make logical predictions. That doesn't mean I'm saying do it all the time. It means it's one of the best ways to really kind of interact with the text, but use it still sparingly. Connect ideas to each other or to other text. You'll often see us looking at texts not in isolation. We might be looking at other texts that have a common thread with them. And so make sure that you connect ideas to each other and to other texts or to things that happen. So for example, in that story, Fahrenheit 451, he tells a story within the story about a memory of his mom. And then later on, you'll be reading another part and you'll be like, oh, I understand why this was important, blah, 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 and you'll write it down. And that is also kind of what an epiphany is. It's that aha light bulb moment when you get it and you're like, oh, that makes sense. Or so note those epiphanies and note anything you would like to discuss or do not understand. Again, that goes back to kind of asking that question and maybe putting a question mark or several question marks, like when I went how or what on the previous slide. So note anything that you need to discuss in class. Don't just blow it off because then you never get your answers and then it comes back to bite you. So make sure you go ahead and get those noted also. So here's a text that's nonfiction, and you'll notice that there's annotations in here, but you'll also notice symbols. So keywords are circled. Claims, main ideas, themes relevant to the task set are underlined. And notice that, relevant to the task set. This doesn't mean that you go into everything willy-nilly and just go to town. Do it with a purpose. What is the purpose? What are you looking for? Why are you doing it? You can note with a symbol feelings about the text. So you can put a heart shaped, and then you can write what you're feeling. Maybe you're like anger next to it. And then box any keywords or new ideas. Okay. So, and when I say that, it's like those main key points. Okay. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a word that you don't know for up here for the keywords. Those could be like illusion. That would be a keyword because it's a literary device, but a new word might be the word profit. Okay? Make sense? All right. So then going back on to annotation, which is that next level, or writing in the margins, we write to make connections, clarify, question, summarize, respond, visualize, and analyze. So those are those big things. And this is an absolute mandatory in my class. Absolutely mandatory that you do this and that you have it done prior to assessments. Because as you'll find out with the redo policy, if you don't annotate, if you don't do all the work prior to it, you're not eligible for redos. So make sure you're doing it as you go, because if you wait till later, or worse yet, try and copy somebody else's, which is no bueno, no good. You will need to make sure that you have your annotations done. That will be one of the criteria that I'll be looking at. It's part of that good faith effort in case you need that redo. So here's an example again from Fahrenheit. So I showed you this kind of picture before, but I want you to notice that right away, Bradbury starts to set the tone and the mood. It was a pleasure to burn. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. So notice he's already setting up this really dark mood. All right, if an author's going to kick off starting off with a really dark mood, I probably better highlight that and annotate it and note it. And then he talks a little bit later about a conductor. Or here, and I didn't highlight it, and I do have it now on my current one highlighted, flapping pigeon-winged books. Those are important symbols. And I better start thinking about them because they're going to reoccur. And I need to know, why did Bradbury choose them? What is he trying to tell me with this symbol? And then if I have a question right here, can a world survive without its history? And I may not be able to answer that right now. Heck, maybe it'll be all the way to the end of the book, and then I'll have to answer it. Well, on my sheet, I'm not answering it because we have to read the book first. Then down here, Montague. He grinned the fierce grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. He knew that when he returned to the firehouse, he might wink at himself, a minstrel man, burnt cork in the mirror. So I wrote down a characterization. My first impression of him, he seems kind of evil and sinister, really cocky. So I made that note because that's characterization. Then up here, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene, we have a metaphor. He's talking about this brass nozzle, this fire hose, as a great python spitting its venomous kerosene. Well, that's interesting because a python is a constrictor and it wouldn't be venomous. So then I know I have to start digging into it. Why is Bradbury choosing to use a snake, which tends to be a typically evil, sneaky, destructive symbol? So why is he using a snake when talking about a fire hose? And why a constrictor and then the word venomous together? And so I have to kind of look at that, and I want to start making sense of it. So I start making guesses about what I think he's trying to say. And then sometimes it's really just important to respond. So the great puff of warm air ran to the cream-tiled escalator rising to the suburb. So then here I put movement. It seems effortless and graceful, which seems like a contradiction to this part up here. So that was my response, my comment about this. So this is kind of what highlighting and annotating should look like. Look at all the writing, the connecting with it, and not as much highlighting, but for every highlight, there has to be a annotation. All right, guys, so there's your review. I hope you take really good notes because you guys are going to be expected to annotate pretty soon. All right, very, very soon. Have a great day.